We in aircraft maintenance are faced with a problem. A group of attorneys has corrupted the Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations Part 147 rules, the Aircraft Maintenance Technical School, or AMTS. The bad news is a group of lawyers, using influence in the United States Congress, have twisted the purpose of AMTS rules to allow for a breakdown of safety. The good news is, well, actually, there isn't any good news concerning the Part 147 rule rewrites. Bureaucrats, including a vindictive U.S. Senator, complacent FAA upper management, and secretaries of transportation who knew nothing about transportation, allowed a 180-degree turn from safe air travel by exploiting a fear of a mechanic shortage. We are facing safety problems never before seen, even as we are finally discovering technology is eating our lunch. Hello, my name is Stephen Carbone, and this is By Reason of Air Safety. I'm going to introduce someone who I consider a foremost authority on Part 147 rules and designees, the DME, the Designated Maintenance Examiner, those who test future aircraft technicians for certification. He has been working with designees and the writing of Part 147 rules for decades. He's taught these topics across the nation and in foreign countries. He was involved in prior attempts to rewrite the Part 147 rules, and as he will explain, failures to rewrite the rules prior to his retirement were not due to complacency by the FAA, but to a failure for all parties to provide data to support suggested changes. In other words, those who campaigned to rewrite the rules chose to procrastinate instead of providing facts. And we're back.
There we go.
Okay. I would like to introduce you to my friend Richard Fletcher. He's an FAA ASI Aviation Safety Inspector, retired, and I'm going to let Richard introduce himself.
Oh, my name is Richard Fletcher. I am a retired aviation safety inspector from several years back. I retired in 2014. Um, I had spent 34 years in the agency. Like many mechanics that I know of, I started out in a 147 school as a student. So I went from there, spent a couple of years in the aviation industry, and then I got a job with the FAA working on their flight inspection aircraft as an A&P mechanic. I did that for several years here in Oklahoma City, and then I took my first position as an aviation safety inspector in '91 at the Seattle Flight Standards District Office. There is where I went through all of my NDOC training and began my career as an aviation safety inspector. What I really liked about that is there were several of us that were new to the agency there. And at that same time, AMTS, the 147 school, was having a revision change, and it became effective. It was to become effective, I should say, in 1992. So I was tasked with a group of other inspectors to go to each of the 5 schools there in Washington State in the district of the Seattle office and make sure or ensure that they had the ability to step into that new 147 revision. It wasn't a major change, but it was change enough that we sought uh, certainty that they would actually be able to accommodate and and actually do what they say they're going to do in the school. So it was pretty simple. We went to all five schools and did all of our evaluations, and we set in classrooms. We reviewed the curriculum, and we really got them prepared to take on that new 147 revision. From Seattle, I would later transfer to the Oklahoma City Flight Standards District office. There, I served really not so much in the capacity of oversight of a 147 school. I dealt with designated mechanic examiners as their principal inspector, and those designated mechanic examiners were tied to or affiliated with the 147 schools, several of them right there in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. I dealt with them quite a bit, and then about midway into my career there in Oklahoma City, I was tasked with certificating a 147 school in Altus, Oklahoma. So my certification skills were brought into being through that certification process. And I would go on to have oversight of them, plus several other DMEs in that area at the time. So that was pretty good. I enjoyed all of that. And I decided to get a change of pace. I wanted to do something different. So I took a job with the designee standardization branch in Oklahoma City at the Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center. My job was as a designee program manager. I had responsibility for the instruction and continued renewal process, testing procedures, and all that for all designated mechanic examiners that were designated by the FAA. At the time I got in, there were close to 400 of them. My job was to go to all 9 regions that the FAA had at that time and do seminars where I brought current information to the DMEs that were already designated. Plus, about 3 times a year, I would do what we called the initial course, where we taught DME wannabes just how to be what we want them to be. We taught them how to, not necessarily the technical skills involved, as to how to evaluate mechanics and testing and that, but what the FAA required, what like paperwork and things of that, because the government paperwork, we've got a ton of that. But our job was to keep them current and make sure they're up and on the latest and greatest in technologies and everything, all the requirements that the FAA may want from them. And then we do the initial, like I said, with the wannabes, and we would teach them, the basics, get them ready to go out and serve as designees. And then once we gave them that 2-day course, they were able to go back to their managing office and say, "All right, I'm ready." And then the managing office, if they needed that designee in the area, would appoint them designation mechanic for an examiner position, and they would do all of the oral and practical tests. I believe when I was there, it was 99.99% of all oral and practical tests for mechanics were done by these designees, all the DMEs nationwide. So I did that from 2002 till I retired in 2014. And in that time, we dealt with 147 on a regular basis because many of our DMEs were affiliated with these schools. So we had to keep close ties with many of the 147 schools. I dealt with a lot of the DMEs at the school and uh, several of the heads of the schools, just to make sure that they were also aware of the requirements of the regulation when it comes to testing. I've sat in 147 oversight classes, or I should say 147 rule uh, evaluations. We got into in about it was around 2002. There's a GAO, a General Accounting Office. They came out with a study that said the 147 rule needs to change. It needs to be brought up to speed. And so
Okay.
that started us out in the whole deal. So I started out going to classes. I ended up retiring. Uh, I started in an AMTS school really to begin my aviation career, and I ended in 2014 as a retired FAA inspector. As soon as I retired, not several weeks later, I became a contract instructor with the FAA at the FAA's Academy here in Oklahoma City. There, I began teaching several courses, and one of them is the 147 AMTS certification course. And it's a 1 week course where we teach all the ASIs how to certificate a 147. And I did that. I think we had 1 to 2 offerings every year, right up until COVID. And then after COVID, we had that major rule change in 2022, and I began teaching. I think I've had 2 classes where we got tried to teach the new rule, and it's quite different. And so that, in a nutshell, is me. I've been teaching up to date, up till now, with the FAA Academy as a part-time contract instructor.
Okay, so when you were talking about and you were originally involved with rewriting the Part 147 revisions back in 2007, you said?
It was around 2006, 2007. I don't know exactly. It was part of it was a advisory rule committee. Basically, it's an ARAC is what we call it, and it's an advisory committee that gets together, and we want to change. It's for someone that wants to change a rule, and it not only
Okay.
has the FAA in it, has industry in it.
Okay.
So we did a kickoff of the ARAC. We're about to start this rewrite, and we're going to get everybody together. And we were at Virginia Beach, I believe it was, and all of us got together with the industry, a lot of ATEC, Aviation Technical Education Council. We got together with quite a few of them. DMEs, we had 147 representatives there. There were quite a few people. Plus, we had representatives from the FAA headquarters in Washington. We had representatives, me, from the Designee Standardization Branch. We had representatives from the Airman Testing Standards Branch who oversee all of the written tests and the oral test contents. They also we had FAA security was there, so there were quite a few different representatives from the administrator. And on the last day, we did a question and answer period. We set up on a big platform. All of the representatives of the FAA had a microphone, and then they would allow people to come up and ask questions. And that's where we finally started hearing really what the schools were wanting. Things like
Okay.
distance learning, get rid of the hours, the 1900 hours, or the
Ex-
450,
Can,
750, and
can
that
you
sort.
can you elaborate on what you mean by the hours?
Well, back in 1965, and I know I'm sounding weird here, but all of this starts back in 1965 with a thing called the Allen Study. And the Allen Study was a 3-part study that lasted from 1965 to 1970. And it came into being just after the FAA was created in 58. So they were seeing early on that they needed something more for the guidelines on how to teach a mechanic in a school, a mechanic applicant, how to teach them on the basic knowledge and skills they would need to enter into the aviation maintenance industry.
Okay.
So with that 3 state, they these 3 parts of it basically came up with um, the curriculum title, the subject
Hmm.
areas, the sections, and then they said, well, here's how many hours you're going to need in these general subjects. It'll take about 450 hours of classroom and shop teaching to teach these subjects. So they put together all their subjects, all the subject areas, and then they found out how long it would teach or how long it would take to teach each of these subject areas. Then they put those all together and said, okay, for a total airframe and power plant, it's going to be 450, and I believe it was 750, 750, something of that nature. So you add them together, and that's where we got the total hours.
Okay.
The
Now
designee.
you
Oh, go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, go ahead, Fletcher.
At the Iraq, the ARAC, they said we want to get rid of that and just have outcome based, where it's you as fast as you can go through this school and pass, we'll shove you through. You won't go a semester. You'll just go until you finish this subject area or this section,
Okay.
that type of deal.
Can can you explain to my listeners what the consequences of that kind of speed course
Right.
kind of
Well,
thing is?
one of the big problems is the quality of instruction.
Hmm.
If I start out with 25 students in a class and I'm going to teach general courses, these are the subject areas, and I'm just going to, the first course, the first subject area is going to be maybe 2 weeks long, the next one's going to be 3 weeks long, the next one's 3 weeks long, something of that nature. By the end of that period, those 25 people will be in 25 different levels. They won't be together. They'll spread apart because some learn faster than others. So there'll
Hmm.
be just, well, it's impossible. Who's going to teach all of them as they're progressing through? It would almost require a school to have an instructor in each subject area and then teach that at least once every however long, just it just be on a continuing loop, and then you could join that anytime you want. Well, that
Right.
requires you to have 40 instructors for a full A&P course,
Okay.
and that's just
And
unheard of.
and it's also, it has to do with the quality of the
Oh,
instruction. I
absolutely.
mean, so the
I mean,
student is not getting go ahead.
if you could do 40 instructors and let them teach one class over and over and over, everything will be good.
Yeah. So
But they
it
can't
really
afford.
is, it really takes away from the quality of the student's learning ability
Oh,
to
absolutely.
be yeah. So what you're saying is as they were doing this back in 2007, their intention was to fast track the education. And to be clear, we didn't have a mechanic shortage back then, right? We didn't back in 2007. It was kind of
Right. It was that's probably around the beginning of, because it was after that we start losing uh, people that got their A&Ps based on experience. When I first got into the designee standardization branch in 2002, it had just I'm gonna say the testing flipped. And I said there are two types of people that qualify. There's either someone that goes to take the A&P test, I should say. There's two kinds of people. One, it's based on civil and or military experience. And the other is an AMTS graduate.
mhm,
In 2002, it was almost 75% of the people taking the oral and practical did it based on experience through military and or civilian experience. There was only about 35%, somewhere in that arena of mechanics applicants coming from schools. But about 2002, that's when it started to flip. I think about 2002, it was about 50-50, and it has
mhm.
just gone the other way since. Now we're at about 30% or less getting it based on experience, and the rest are going through schools.
Right.
So all of those that are basing it on experience, that's usually ex-military, uh, people that are working as apprentice at different airports and things like that. They're all starting to go out. You have, especially when you have large surges in military, like um, when I got into the FAA, it was because the World War II people were rolling out the door.
Right.
Then we had the Korean War veterans rolling out the door. The mechanics were retiring, and then we had Vietnam there, and that's where we sat in 2002. Is we're starting to lose that. Well, now we're getting all these AMPs coming through the schools, and they were doing pretty good, but other companies start to steal from the schools. They
Hmm.
they said, "Hey, I'll take this guy. Here's one of your students. That's one of your top students." They offer him jobs somewhere else that you don't need to graduate. Come
Right.
with us and work for our company.
Right.
One of them, St. Louis. Um, I remember going to a school in St. Louis, and the 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 director there at the school said, "We're losing some of our prime class members to the Anheuser-Busch brewery into their maintenance
Mm,
division." They said, "You don't need
mm,
this. We'll pay you good money to come over and work on our machines." And they handpicked who they wanted. So we
yeah.
kept getting that as well, taking away. But it didn't start happening till sometime just after that. We started getting a shortage of
Right.
mechanics in the
I
field.
remember I remember back in the 80s when some of the airlines, I worked for FedEx, were trying to incentivize the local AMP schools to to drive their classes to get accomplished, that the people that came out would be trained to that airline's particular continuous airworthiness maintenance program, to their culture in how they did maintenance. So the airlines were trying to get in front of this. As we went through time, repair stations increased in numbers. The airlines increased in numbers, and the attention towards AMP mechanics towards airlines had changed to being for repair stations, overhaul facilities, and everything else like that. Those
Yeah,
were starting to come online at the time. But you had mentioned before about virtual training. So, for instance, virtual training is kind of limited as far as, for instance, like this would be a virtual training
that's
environment
correct.
where you and I see one at a 360-degree circle. We're seeing 1 degree. That means a 359 degrees we don't see as if we're teaching. Also, if you would go on about who is with when you have a virtual classroom training, how does that affect the ability to monitor who's actually taking a test, for
Uh,
instance?
it, there are a lot of things that come into play when you do virtual training. A is like you and we're on a live feed together on a camera. Some distance learning is just the student watching a prefabricated tape, or they've already. It's just they're looking at an instructor give instruction, and
Mm-hmm.
then at the end of it, they take a test. Well, our distance learning guidance in the FAA says, oh, they've got to be able to ensure that the person taking the test is the person taking the test. I don't know how they do that when it's something where they're looking at like an electronic, just an electronic classroom with no that's not live. Now, live is a little different. You and I can see that we're both here at the same time, and an instructor can see that. What the instructor can't see is, like you're saying, anything out of picture. And if they're just in a learning environment, that's one thing. But if they do testing of any kind, there's no way that we know for sure that the person on the other end is actually the one taking the test. And the rules at one time said every every time you finish a subject area, at least you're going to take a test over that subject area and go on before you can advance to the next. So when you do this all electronic, you have no idea truly who is taking the course or who is taking the test. And as an instructor, what I find extremely difficult about the the media format here of video, I can't tell for the most part when a student actually understands. And I know it sounds weird, even though I can see their face, it's hard to determine when they see it. And I'd like to find people, they may disagree, but when I'm face to face in a classroom, I can tell which people I'm dealing with are the ones that they're actually getting it. They actually
Yeah.
understand what we're saying, and you can see the concept. You can see it just in the way they're attentive and the way they look and how they act.
Yeah.
Whereas it's very difficult, especially if you're on a Zoom class. I don't mean to speak bad about Zoom. I'm just going to say in a Zoom type format where the instructor has some kind of a slideshow that he's showing. There's a PowerPoint presentation going on, and then every picture of the students, which we don't, now the schools can have as many as they want in a classroom, but it's normally like 25 to 1. But even 25 students, you put them all in their pictures about one by one on a pretty good sized screen. I mean, it's really difficult to see. Then we have all the data that came from COVID on the distance learning from COVID. And we see
Mm-hmm.
that on every grade level, from elementary school, middle school, high school, it's not worked.
Right.
Colleges that offer distance learning, that's the hardest problem they have, is ensuring that the student that they're teaching is the one actually, one taking the test, one that's actually doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Many of
Yeah.
them, live is one thing, but a lot of them, they offer, here's a course and you just watch a video of somebody teaching a subject and then you go take the test. It's all, it's just all has a negative aspect to it. And when it comes to the learning environment, I
It's
don't, there's no data that supports that this is equivalent to a classroom live sitting in front
that's
of you.
that's what I wanted. That's what I want to get. And just to add to what you were saying, when you're showing a slideshow, because Fletch and I teach together in a school, a government school. But when you have multiple people in what I call the Brady Bunch screens, where you
Yeah,
have multiple faces in there, and some of them are on another page, so you're not seeing all the whole class. But also, as you're showing a slideshow, as you're showing the lesson here, you can't see them. I can't even see if somebody's raising a hand. I can't see. I always tell my students, shout out because I can't
yeah,
see you. So, like Richard was saying, that if you are looking at somebody, or you're concentrating on the lesson, you have no way of knowing if they're actually getting the material, or they're rolling their eyes, or they're whatever they're doing in reaction. But I want to hit on what you were saying just now, when you were saying in part of these revisions, and they were bringing up things like virtual training and stuff like this. You said the data. What was the FAA's response to the data, or lack thereof?
oh well, they tried to change this rule. They put quite a few things together. Are you talking about when they were trying to get the rule changed?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things in the ARAC that came out, they wanted all of this. They had we called it the wish list. They wanted distance learning, outcome based, get rid of any requirements in there for hours, all that. And we said, do you have any data to support it? The Allen study is 5 years of data gathering, and they put it together. They got all the information they wanted, and then they ran it through a test bed. They checked it out before they even tried to put it together and say, okay, United States government, here's what you wanted, here's what you got. They put it all together. So they got the data together to support what they were saying, and then they tested it and found, okay, this will work. And then they put it in, and that's where we get the current 140, or at that time, the 147 outline. Here's how many hours, here's how many subject areas. That lasted for, that was 1970. I took my test just a few years later, and as far as I know, it stayed like that up until about 92. So they had about 20 years of data that they put together on this.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why the schools are wanting to. There is a huge demand for mechanics right now. They call it the mechanic
Shortage.
funnel. I think
Yeah.
it's what the it's they're just trying to shove as many mechanics out there into the industry as they can. But there's a hazard there when you do that, of possibly getting mechanics out there that just don't know what they're doing.
Right. And we're
For
starting to see that. We're starting to see that now. We're
oh
starting to see
yeah,
that in industry, and even the things we see are not indicative of the things we don't see, that are the GA type accidents, and that are not making the
absolutely.
headlines.
That,
So we're
yeah,
seeing a
not the big
lot of,
headline grabbers.
yeah, yeah. If you're not seeing a tire fall off a 777 falling in San Francisco or LA, you can bet there's about 20 or 30 other problems that are in the other industries that we are not seeing. I'm not even talking about helicopters and unmanned aerial vehicles, things like that that are occurring, fixed wing, whatever it is, that we're not seeing in this collection of data. So, so you've seen how it was before they decided to go into a roundabout of how they were going to do the rule change.
Right.
Can you give a little example of a little synopsis of what happened when they uh, when they did get the rule change? What did they do
Well,
in 2022? What
in
did
22, it wasn't going well enough for. There was a notice of proposed rule. There's actually two. One of them was for the old Part 66 change, and they had just a little bit of a change in 147 on that. That didn't go over well, and so they were going even more in the direction of where they are now, and they were actually accumulating some information, and COVID hit,
Mhm.
and everything went stagnant, and the rule change didn't go any farther. That's when ATEC took it upon themselves to contact Congress, and they petitioned Congress and said this needs to be changed and it has to be done. And they found a sympathetic ear in a Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma, of all places. You may remember him. He introduced the bill for Pilots Bill of Rights. So all those papers you were signing at the beginning of your certification process, you can thank Senator Inhofe. But he was uh, swayed and followed through and created what they call the FAA Act in I think it was 2022, and it basically mandated the FAA forget about that at NPRM, write a rule, and so they put together a rule right then and there, and pumped it through, and it's what we have today. So that rule basically sidestepped the notice of proposed rulemaking process just to have one put together because
Right.
Congress mandated with an act.
Right. And to understand, to be clear, the notice of proposed rulemaking, the NPRM process, is a means for industry to feedback on what they find good or bad about the rule change that's in process. It hasn't been approved, but it allows for mechanics, it allows for aircraft A&P schools, for pilots, whoever it is that has a say in what this rule is going to take place.
Correct.
Senator Inhofe and ATEC, what was it, Aircraft Technical Education Council, wipe that out. You don't get a voice in this. We're going to
That's right.
change the rule whether you like it or not. And now we have some of the changes that were given to this, um, were they removed the appendices,
Oh,
and I'll put a picture of that up on their thing later. But can you, Richard, tell us what the appendices were?
well, in the old 147, the appendices were where we kept all of the general aviation curriculum subject areas, the for the general portion, I should say. Also, the two sections of airframe were in the appendices, all the subject areas by title and what the content was, and then all the ones for power plant, the two sections in power plant. But the big one was in appendices A. That had the learning levels. Teach to a level 1, teach to a level 2, or a level 3. Level 1 was very simple. There's no manipulative skills in level 1. If I wanted to show you information about, let's just say, a radial engine, I could throw up a video and say, "This is a radial engine. Here it is. Here's one running. Here's the parts, the main parts," and I can show you pictures and videos and graphs, any of that, and it's just presented by lecture, basically. But it's called level 1. Level 2, there's some manipulative skills involved. I may have you go out and pick up a cylinder and measure the inside with a measure a vernier caliper or something like that. I may have something anything, do internal measurement, external measurements, whatever I need to do on the cylinder or a piston, any of that I'd have to do. Well, let me use a piston, and I'm going to use a vernier caliper, and I'm going to measure the outside, uh, the the size of the piston. A level two, I'm just gonna let you practice measuring, and it's all good. Level three, let's do that same project. I'm going to get you a piston, and it's going to come out of a Continental engine. Now I'm going to give you a vernier caliper, and I'm going to ask you, tell me if that piston's airworthy or not. Does it meet the standard? And you measure it in accordance with FAA approved or accepted data. And in this case, it would be the Continental Engine Overhaul Manual, and you would measure it to see if it was within tolerances and whether or not it should go back into the engine or it needs to be scrapped. That's a return to service standard. So you simulate a return to service standard with all level threes. When they got rid of the appendices, they got rid of all the teaching levels. If you look at the new airman certification standards that they wrote, they're very good. I mean, don't get me wrong; they cover all the bases. They went from 44 subject areas in the old style to 40 subject areas with the new A&P under the ACS, the Airman Certification Standards. The new ones, though, have no testing levels. So where before we had to inspect an engine and do it at a level three, you would pull the engine inspection criteria from the maintenance documents for that engine, and you would do the inspection in accordance with that. Now it says, look at an engine. Anyone can develop the guidelines for that. We don't even know if they do it to return to service. None of that makes any sense.
Yeah.
They got rid of all of it. What that happens is they've relied solely or almost totally on the DME during the oral and practical to ensure that if this person doesn't know what they're doing, they didn't learn it in the 147 school, they won't get a certificate.
Okay.
They were our last line of defense because they're going to test them in the practical project. Many of those practical projects will be to a return to service standard. That's how we taught the DMEs to do it. The problem, they didn't like that. ATEC, ATEC didn't like the idea that DMEs were the last. They want to be in charge of testing as well. So they've just introduced in October what we call an Organizational Designee Authority, ODA. What that will do, if I'm a 147 school and I get ODA, all the testing is done in-house. I just have
It's
just a little problem with letting a fox watch the hen house.
right.
I
It's
just
a very biased. It's a biased kind of
oh,
way of teaching.
it's extremely. It leaves itself open.
Okay.
What
You
would
locked
we
up.
what we would need to do is the FAA would need to be able to go in and have a lot of oversight,
All right.
but I don't see that happening. They're going to let the schools basically police themselves, and they'll do occasional oversight. Whoever the ODA managing office is, they'll do some oversight, but it won't be like how it was when we as inspectors did our oversight of classrooms. We could go more frequently depending on the school and what was needed. So,
You just locked up a little bit, or either that or I locked up, which is actually a good thing because it shows my listeners what the problem is with virtual training. Is when we're teaching at the academy, we often lock up or our students lock up.
yeah,
So there's no there's no recurring. You don't go back a page to look at what you just keep going, and if you didn't catch it, you didn't catch it. Um,
yeah, we should all dress like Max Headroom so it looks
right.
normal.
So, all right. So the appendices were taken out by which are by ATEC, which are essentially lawyers. So lawyers have told the aircraft maintenance industry that they know aircraft maintenance better than the industry does and better than the FAA does, which, by the way, the FAA no longer has as much authority to overseeing not just the Part 147 classes, but the designated maintenance examiner, the DME, who is now an ODA, organizational designee authority. The FAA has been taken out of the picture totally. The FAA, who works according to building up safety by following the Part 147 rules, have been taken out of the surveillance and oversight. So the FAA doesn't even have the ability to tell a school you need to fix this or that, or you need to get equipment because it's not safe the way you're doing it. They don't have that authority anymore.
Right.
So what they have done, what ATEC and the powers that be have done, is given accredited schools the authority in determining what is a good aircraft A&P education. Can you expand on what an accredited university does or a school does?
There, when a school wants to, the 147, many of them have all long been accredited, and it's just a government group in the Department of Education that has allowed a school, hey, we've looked at your curriculum, we look at everything, and it meets our guidelines here for accreditation. And so they give them this, makes them accredited. There's a lot more to it than that. I mean, there are some rules for accreditation that are listed in the DOE, but the Department of Education made that statement, and then what it allows to, if you're an accredited school and somebody goes through half of the school, you can get credit for that if you went through that. Like if I went through Spartans and it's accredited and I got to the general section, but I had to move because of family upheaval or whatever. My parents are moving or something. I got to go with them. I can go to another accredited school, and many of them would say, "Okay, Spartans is accredited. We'll let that general go. You can just pick up where you left off here in our airframe course." So it's been around for a while, but now they have so much more. Before, in the old 147, a 147 school would submit their curriculum to the FAA, and we would review that curriculum, and we would ensure they had the facilities, equipment, and materials, classrooms, everything they had, and they could do this actual curriculum, and we would approve it. When the FAA approves it, that means that's the binding document. All the 147, it had to follow that to the T, to the letter. They couldn't go outside of the 147 approved curriculum for their school. So we had that. We could go in afterwards and do our surveillance. Even the new rule says they've got to let FAA in to do inspection. The problem is we have to determine they're in compliant with just a few requirements of the part. There's just a little we can look at, and if they're accredited, we can't look at the curriculum. It's not part of our inspection procedure anymore. So they can get a credit or they can go and get accreditation, and there's nothing we can do towards their curriculum. We have to look at the test results before we can go in, and even then, if they don't meet the testing standards, we can only go in and talk to them about it and make suggestions on how they're going to fix it, because it's all part of the DOE's oversight program. They're the ones that would have to go in. My question is, if I've got somebody from the DOE going in and looking at a 147 school, what qualifications does that person have when they go in? Is it on an education basis or is it on an aviation basis?
Right.
What is their
So the
what is their level of knowledge? I mean, I have no idea. And what's going to happen now that it looks like this current administration is trying to get rid of the Department of Education? Is that going to affect the accredited schools that are already out there? If they're not accredited, they have to develop a quality control system, and part of that quality control system is the curriculum. And so, if they're under a quality control system under the new rule, we have a little more say so in there because we have a lot of things to do. They've got to still follow that curriculum. So that's the big deal with accreditation is if they're accredited, the FAA, we can go in and we're really looking at it from outsider looking in, and only for if we have results that are negative. I don't know what you would do if you walked into a class and the instructor was terrible, all the students were asleep. You've got no rule to hang on, because if they come back and they say, "Well, that was just nap time and it's scheduled in our class," wait till the overall score comes in. You'll see they're fine.
Yeah.
We would have no other way of doing it, and that's kind of how they want it. They want the FAA out of it. They don't want us looking over their shoulders.
Right.
Not any
And
surveillance. If they could get rid of never letting us in, they would be happy with it. And with
right.
ODA, that's gonna man. They've got the entire testing process, teaching and testing.
Yeah. So you could have a liberal arts department chair in a university who has authority over the AMP curriculum.
Oh,
You also have the FAA has no authority. Now understand this, and I want to be clear about this. When we talk about the FAA doesn't have any surveillance or oversight authority about this type of training, the FAA does have authority to go into an airline or a repair station, and not just to do the design of their curriculum and how they're going to teach how to fix that A300, A320 aircraft, but they have the ability to go back and do surveillance in that class. This has been taken away in an AMP school, which is trying to train people to be that person who is going to qualify to go in there. Now, if you have an airline that does not meet the standards that they had created, if they said, "Well, we're going to teach the A320 in this way," and the FAA goes in to do surveillance, and they're not doing it that way. They're not hiring qualified instructors. They're not following a specific curriculum. They are not meeting a standard of the lesson plan as it was laid out. They can take action against that airline because they are now unsafe. The FAA doesn't have that authority anymore in an aircraft technical school. And that doesn't make sense because these are the folks, boys and girls, men and women who are coming up into the industry to learn how to work on airplanes. And or I should say, the FAA doesn't know if they're being taught right. And they really don't have the authority to make a point of that. The lawyers have decided that they want the FAA out of that decision making process. So I guess what my question here would be, we've we've established that it's affected the quality of AMP certification, not just through the 147 school, but also in those who are going to be doing the certification testing. Okay, they have been worked on, and that has been molded into something different. So it is not an unbiased person who is doing this. It's a representative of the school is saying, "Well, I think everything we taught you was great, even though you don't know what a torque wrench is." And they are going to be able to make that decision, and the FAA doesn't have any say in that.
that is true.
So that's one part of it. It affects the quality of the education, it affects the quality of the certification, it affects the testing of it. But also we are starting to see, or at least I think, and we're going to talk about this more in the second half of this podcast, which we're going to tape next week. We're starting to see it in the industry. Now, Richard, would you talk a little bit about this data since 22? So for 3 years, or going on 4 years now, we have been following the new and improved lawyer drafted Part 147 rules,
Right.
but we haven't any idea what has come out of that yet.
That's exactly right. The old rule, we had a thing called the school norms report. And the school norms report would take every person that graduated from a 147, and when they took their written test and their oral and their practical, we saw all the test results. But the main for the norms report was the written test, the first one they take after they graduate. The rule says in Part 65, they must take the written test first. So they take the written, and that written test is broken down. Before it was broken down just like it was in 147, 44 subject areas. And we could see where a graduate from a school, I took the test, they may have even passed a test, but we could see where they scored bad in a subject area because they were tested in all the subject areas. We would take that data back to the school and say, look, we noticed in the airframe, your sheet metal guys aren't scoring very good on bend radius
Ribbit.
and all this, just a particular part of sheet metal. We could go in and we could look into a classroom, set in on the classroom, the classroom portion of it, and go out into the shop, the associated shop projects with it, and see was there some disconnect there, or was this just a bad timing? But we would see that, and the school norms report would take an individual school and compare it with the national overall picture. We would crunch the numbers and say this is a national norm for this subject area. When we did that, the students could, we could tell, I shouldn't say students, the school, we could tell whether or not they were meeting the national norm. That went away. Now they have a minimum pass rate. And it basically says if you take the FAA test within 60 days after you graduate, it says you must pass one of the following tests. And it lists the written test, the oral test, and the practical test. And it says you got to pass one of those or a combination thereof. And what they mean by that is if I take in a 60-day window, I take my writtens and pass all them, and then I go take my oral and practical, I got to pass all them. So if I take all the written, and in this case, if I was an A and P, that would be 3 written tests, and then basically the oral and practical is broken down into 2 portions, oral and practical. So it's 2 tests for each section. So it's really 3 written tests, general airframe power plant, and then for the oral and the practical, I've got 3 for the airframe power plant in general of the oral, and 3 airframe power plant general of the practical. So you're looking at 9 tests total if they take all of them. Or it says just pass one. I think I know a way around all this thing to make it look good. If I'm a 147 school, I'm going to say, hey, we're going to prep you. We'll offer a free prep class for a month or so. Just go take your writtens and make sure they pass their writtens, because all they have to do is pass one. And even if they fail, they can go get additional instruction, come back and retest, and they'll pass. Now, picture I'm an ODA 147. All that testing's done in-house, so I can make sure to groom everybody. I can make those numbers work if it were me, because it's just the sad part is it's 60 days after graduation, and then it says it's for the most recent 3-year period. So really, we're just now coming to the end of the first 3-year period where we need this data, and we don't have it out there. It says in FAA guidance that they're going to come up with a website or a place. They're going to let everybody know here's where you go. And I believe right now there may be a contact person that you can reach out to from the FAA side and get that information, but I'm not sure it's out there yet. So we've already come up to that first 3-year window, and we don't know if anyone meets this new minimum passing rate. We have no way of telling.
And we'll be 3 years in. We'll be 3 years backwards when we find out if or if not the data is there.
So
and
let's
then,
just say it's bad.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
find out now that it's bad. So all of those that came from 22 to date are lousy mechanics that made it through. Oh, that's bad.
Or the school hasn't been doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is getting us who are giving us skilled people to do the job that they're being asked to do. So we will be further back with our mechanic shortage if we have a problem where the industry has to retrain people on the basic skills that they were supposed to be learning. So I hope we haven't scared you too much with this so far, but we're we're gonna we're gonna have a part two to this in 2 weeks, because I think this is an important topic. Actually, Richard and I have been talking about this for quite a while. This is an important topic for the aircraft maintenance people out there to understand what is going on. That everybody's saying, "Oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread," but not many people who got involved in doing this really could comment on it with any kind of authority.
Hmm.
Richard, did you want to add anything?
They use a phrase, and I know there's been others have said it, and it drives me crazy because it's even though it has its true, it, they have a statement that says the A&P mechanic certificate is a license to learn. Yes, it is, but there's authority that comes with it when you walk straight out the door with that ticket in your hand. It's more than that. So we can't look at it. I mean, if really if it was just a license to learn, why do we even have them go to it? Just give them an authorization. Here, you can go be an apprentice at American Airlines, and then American can train them however they want. They can do that now. They don't need an A&P. American Airlines could hire. What we have though is a lot of people. They may try to get in the airlines, they can't. They end up in GA or working on somebody. That's what we were talking about earlier. They're working in GA, and we don't know of the bad stuff that happens so much. It doesn't make the national news, like a tire falling off coming into San Francisco, or taking
Mhm.
off from San Francisco, or any of that stuff. So it's just a all the bells are going off in my head when I started seeing this 147 proposal way back in 22. Uh, we've just taken ourselves, I think, the FAA too far out of the loop, and I can't find any reason for that, and no one can give it to me other than we need to get more mechanics out there, and I just don't see that as a smart way of doing business. We cannot just be funneling mechanics out there just for the sake of feeding an industry that needs more mechanics. We got to think
Needs
about the flying public, the safety
need
of the flying.
right. Needs more quality more than quantity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for taking the time to help my listeners understand the complexity of the aircraft maintenance technical schools, the uncertain part designated maintenance examiners will play in the future, and the intent of the Part 147 regulations, both old and new, and how these illegitimate changes to the Title 14 CFR Part 147 regulations, to quote J.R. Tolkien, look fair but feel foul. The idea that lawyers believe they know the Part 147 regulations and their interpretation better than seasoned FAA inspectors and experienced technical school instructors is absolutely ludicrous. It is the fault of incompetent FAA administrators, oblivious former DOT secretaries, and bureaucrats in the aviation industry and Congress that we now find ourselves in this slow walk away from aviation safety. In the end, we can ask ourselves, what if? As in, what if the FAA upper management took their responsibilities seriously? Or what if the airlines focused on quality and not quantity? Or what if groups like ATEC really did care about future AMTS students and not the money industry will make off the rewrite? Truth be told, there's no such thing as what if. There never was. We are faced with the reality of what is. As the data starts to become available concerning the ineffective direction Part 147 has taken, we must ask ourselves, how do we fix this problem? Now, in episode 12 of By Reason of Air Safety, Richard Fletcher will be back to look at the present and future problems with the rewritten Part 147 regulations. We'll look into how organizations like ATEC have corrupted and will continue to corrupt the trade schools, how mechanic unions will push to ensure union member numbers increase, bringing more union dues. Well, when we go through proper processes such as the notices of proposed rulemaking to right the ship, How much persuasion and pushback can the now established universities with their accreditation apply to fighting those changes? And how safety is already being compromised in real time in the airlines? How incompetent FAA upper management continues to allow complacency and inexperience to rule the FAA. And we will look at airline accidents and incidents that demonstrate we are already at the point of aviation safety failure on a worldwide scale. Until next time, I am Stephen Carbone reminding you to tab. Think safe, act safe, be safe. God bless.